In my experience, when a presentation starts, I often find that the body is here, but the mind and our attention lags a bit. I don't know if you're like me, but my attention, my mind always seems to be the last ones to the party, so to speak. So let's take a moment or two to kind of settle in. I would gladly take some time at the beginning of a presentation to ensure that we are present so that you can kind of be with the rest of it. For this presentation in particular, I was confronted with a little bit of a conundrum. Given practicalities with COVID, I'm going to be using a lecture, teleconferencing, and a PowerPoint to a group of highly educated Western medical professionals. And my goal is to engage you on a level other than your intellect. If you're anything like me, you've been trained over decades to approach talks and lectures with thoughts first, with your mind first. Maybe it's to learn a new technique, a study, a statistic, an approach, and assimilate it so that you can reproduce it for your patients. However, if you approach our time together like this, I'm worried that you might miss the mark. In fact, I find a lot of the problem with burnout and failed attempts at self-care is that we approach self-care kind of like this, like an intellectual exercise, something that's formulaic or something that has specific and concrete steps to help you get to where you want to go. I don't think this is the way that it works. So let me say at the start that I don't think I'm going to surprise you with any one really missing activity that you need in order to never burn out or always be engaged in your work. Instead, I want to curate a little bit how we start. And I do this in an attempt to kind of open you to some of the avenues or approaches to self-care that I present later. I'm positive you'll find something that you kind of intuitively resonate with if you're kind of present and approach it in a little bit different way than just kind of more ideas to get into the mind, right? So let's take a moment and check in with your breath. Imagine that when we're going through this presentation, that you're listening with your entire body, not just with your ears. Sometimes that can be helpful to stay present and open. And I find it's particularly helpful to imagine that you're paying as much attention to the silent gaps between my sentences and slides as you do to what I actually say. And let's just take a step back and appreciate that this time in history is particularly challenging for burnout, stress, and decompensation. We're talking about self-care in the time of COVID, right? I'm supposed to be on a beach in Hawaii getting ready for this presentation. I'm not supposed to be stuck in Northern California with forest fires and doing this on a recording. But let's just also take a moment to appreciate how wonderful it is that we're coming together as a group and taking the whole day to learn from each other, to care for ourselves, and to let us know that we're kind of not alone in this. You have colleagues, you have support. I also think it's important that I remind you that receiving and taking time to care for yourself or taking time just for you is not a selfish endeavor. In fact, I feel that it's a non-optional duty as a healthcare provider to model good self-care and not just instruct our patients on how to care for themselves, right? Model, not just do as I say, not as I do. So when I start, just take from this presentation what you can. There's copies of it. You don't need to furiously take notes. We can get things out to you. And if anything in this presentation doesn't serve you, feel free to let it go. So the core premise of this presentation is that there's nothing inherent in any activity or inactivity that makes it good self-care. I think that good self-care is determined more by the quality of the action and inaction. And inactions are very much possibly something that could be good for self-care. And also to the degree to which what you do or don't do is kind of life affirming. That really kind of connects you with what's really important, right? So there's no one prescription or cure that I can offer you. There's no secret that you need to learn. There's no, small bit of esoteric knowledge that you need to assimilate before you can go on this self-care journey. And you definitely won't be leaving this presentation with a checklist, although the mind would really love that, right? I can't do these things for a couple of reasons. Why? Because believing that there is one cure or one secret outside of you that you need for self-care is part of the problem, right? It's important that whatever avenue you go down to take care of yourself, to keep yourself engaged with your work and sane, comes from you, right? You don't want it to come from me, and you don't need it to come from me. Also know that what you need will change over time, right? So if I were to hand you something specific now, it probably wouldn't stay good for indefinitely. And you're going to need to learn how to kind of adapt over time, right? So I offer you something that I think is actually better. I'm going to offer you a number of signposts and roadmaps, and hopefully you'll find something that you just kind of resonate with, something that kind of pops out with you, that kind of disturbs in a way, right? But like I said in the beginning, it helps to be present and be still. Because I think Nietzsche said it the best, right? For happiness, what little suffices for happiness? The least thing precisely, the gentlest thing, the slightest thing, a lizard's rustling, a breath, a moment, a glance. Littlest makes up the best happiness. Be still. And I think it's true that these little things really do translate to great happiness. But little can mean subtle. And if we're not present and still, sometimes we miss it. Okay. So the title of my talk today is Radical Self-Care. I'm Paul Hutman. I'm Dr. Hutman, and I give you my email address there in case you have questions. Feel free. I love getting questions after presentations and talking things out or connecting you with resources. And I just want to genuinely thank Kelly for having me at this presentation. This is something that I absolutely love to do, and I mostly do it just for its own sake. It's the own icing on the cake for me. So that she gave me an opportunity to do this for a group of people just means the world to me. And thank you for everyone at the Hawaii Health Workforce Summit that made it possible. I know I interacted with Tom and Ron, and I know there's a lot others behind the scenes that I didn't get the chance to meet. But thank you for making this possible. So like I said, my name is Paul, and I'm elated to be here now and present. Self-care and the things that I talk about in here are really passions of mine, and I kind of amalgamated a lot of different resources, a lot of things that really interest me, and kind of distilled it into one presentation to offer a number of signposts. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I have a staff position at a VA, so I mostly work with veterans, doing individual and group psychotherapy and then some testing. But I also do a considerable amount of time presenting, and I do a little research, try to publish papers kind of here and there, right? As this presentation goes, I will monitor the chat box, and if there are some quick answers to questions or comments that I can get to, I'll happy to do that. But I also made sure that this presentation does not take the full hour, because I think one thing I love about these presentations is that I get questions that kind of challenge me or that might be beneficial to a lot of people. So I'd like to respond with the audio at the end if you have any questions, or if I notice in the chat box that there's themes of questions, I'll try to address those, right? Before I move on, a little disclaimer. I have no financial stake in any of the resources that I present here. I really just put them forward because I found them beneficial to myself directly in my practice working with veterans, or it has a lot of research behind it. And I really just put it out there for your benefit. I don't make any money on any of these things. And although I work for the VA Northern California healthcare system, I am not today acting as representative of that system or the Department of Veterans Affairs in general. Okay, so just as an overview, there's kind of 5 parts to my presentation. The first one, I talk about why abiding in contentment is challenging. and this revolves around the negativity bias. I talk about some of my favorite ways of correcting the negativity bias, which is things that we do for our self-care. And we'll be practicing one in the presentation today. I also have a number of simple and profound practices. Even though they might be kind of subtle or simple, don't overlook their ability to transform and kind of keep us in good healthcare or good self-care. I have a number of resources here. You'll notice that almost on every bottom of every slide, I have a reference or a citation. And if you go in the back of the last couple of slides here, everything's listed out so you can look it up later. I've referenced people and do some quotes, right? So all of these might be avenues, if something kind of pops out with you, this might be an avenue for you to explore kind of on your own. And I'd love if it kind of was choose your own self-care adventure kind of thing. It kind of launched you in a good direction. And then of course, like I said, I'll leave time for questions at the end, hopefully where I can respond impromptu with the audio. So I'd like to start today by talking about the negativity bias, right? There are two ways of being unhappy. Not getting what you want is one, and getting what you want is the other. And I think this is a famous quote from Eckhart Tolle in his book, The New Earth, but I also think it kind of really gets at what makes self-care challenging or what contributes to the negativity bias in the same way, right? It's that even getting what you want or not getting what you want can still leave you discontented or unhappy, right? So although positives are in abundance, and if you take a little time out and do like some gratitude listing or check in with gratitude, you'll find that there are a plethora of things, even right now in this moment, that are positives, right? I have a lungs full of air. I know where my next meal's coming from. I have water. I'm feeling pretty good today. I get to do something I love, right? I have a place, I have a roof over my head. You know, I have friends and family. There's tons of positives happening all the time. Yet, our minds tend to focus on and magnify the negatives. And so it can put us into kind of like an altered negative state. And this is largely because the brain is biased in a number of ways, with both attending to negative stimuli and processing negativity, right? It's just this little slant towards the negative, right? And it's not just a slight slant. It's actually quite a big thing. When we do fMRI studies or PET scans, a whole bunch of different things, we find that the brain is negative on almost every way that we divide up functioning or divide up regions in the brain. For instance, there are far more pain receptors than pleasure receptors, both in the body and in the brain, right? There's a few parts of the body that can put us into an ecstatic amount of pleasure, and only a few parts, right? But nearly all parts of the body, internal and external, can put us in an excruciating amount of pain if they're injured, right? There is generally more neural activity in response to negative stimuli than positive stimuli. There's an important brain structure you might be aware of called the amygdala. And the amygdala sits in the middle of the brain, and it's kind of like the barometer, and it measures all the positive and negative stimuli happening across different regions of the brain. It's kind of like a centralized hub. And about 3/4 of it, 75%, is devoted to processing negative stimuli and signals, and only 1/4 to 1/3 is devoted to processing positive. Our brains are really good at storing negative experiences into memory. If you've ever been into a car accident or had a traumatic event or something that kind of really stands out in a negative way, some things are kind of burned onto your retina. So that, you know, these images or experiences really locked in there, and it can happen relatively quickly, right? Our brains are also really good at retrieving negative memories from a memory store. It takes a little more effort to retrieve positive memories. Especially our visual system, but a lot of systems are really focused on orienting to threats really quickly, and we orient less quickly or we miss rewards, right? So for instance, in the periphery of our vision, if we see two dots that kind of look like two eyes, our instinct is to orient right to it, right? This happens a lot when you're driving at night and you see like eyes of like rabbits or deer kind of in the side of the road, or whatever animals you have in Hawaii. I don't think there's too many deer, but there could be. But up here, you see a lot of deer or cows, right? Those eyes pop out at you and you orient to them really quickly. Not so much with positive things like chocolate cake, right? Going further, we more quickly identify aggressive faces than happy faces when they flash quickly on our screen. We often also discount positive experiences. So they've done studies where they have people kind of on multiple scales, or like a scale like 1 to 10, rate how positive an experience was. And then they ask them again months, years later, how'd you rate it? How positive was it? And it tends to dwindle over time. So although it was an 8 out of 10 when you first, jumped out of an airplane, when looking back on it, you think it's only like a 6, right? So it kind of, the positive kind of melts over time. Or we discount it. The mind's also really good at discounting. Oh, it was a positive experience, but yeah, yes, and kind of discounting processes, right? We can also list more flaws than strengths of both ourselves and those around us. And they've done some interesting studies that I probably wouldn't want to be a part of, where they ask couples, like spouses, list some qualities about your spouses. And they find that when you don't prompt it to be positive or negative, that people tend to come up with more negative than positive. And this is true, again, of yourself as well. I would hate to be a researcher on that study and letting your partner know all the negative things you listed about them, but that's beside the point. And taste aversion learning is a really good example of this. So taste aversion learning is the strongest learning known to man, right? This is when you ingest or drink something, right? And then you immediately become sick afterwards, like food poisoning. Even if you become sick and it's not necessarily directly related to what you ingested, you have that long-lasting kind of aversion to that, right? I know people who have gotten sick on tequila or chicken or something like that, and it's years before they go back to it, right? And there's no other learning that we know of in psychology where you can have one event happen and it change your behavior almost indefinitely, maybe for years, right? Usually it takes a lot of repetition or a lot of shaping in order to make a behavior into something that lasts for years, but not with taste aversion learning, right? And it's a negative type of learning, right? So this is just some. We could spend probably the whole presentation talking about ways in which the negativity bias is there in the brain, right? But the brain's also biased in other ways, in more subjective ways. If you consider the continuum of human experience, if we're having a negative experience, we want it to be positive, neutral. And if it's neutral, we want it to be positive. And if it's positive, we want it to be even more positive. We want the positivity to last longer, right? The challenge with this kind of hedonic principle is that there's always more positive to be had, right? No matter where you are, there's always something that might make it just a little bit better, right? And the human brain, subjectively, the human brain kind of as it is, and also the mind, kind of our subjective experience, isn't really good at just kind of being contented about where we're at, right? So just being, okay, it's neutral, and just allowing it to be neutral. It seems like we put in a lot of time, money, effort, energy, resources into trying to maximize everything to make it more positive. But it can be kind of like a hamster wheel kind of effect. And this is one of the original teachings of the Buddha, and it's backed by science, right? So the negativity bias is here, subjectively, objectively, in neural imaging studies. But why have it? Why is it here? And you have to remember that it helped our species survive, right? The negativity bias is here because our brains were sculpted by natural selection, right? And in this kind of, if you think about it in a hunter-gatherer and evolutionary kind of context, there are far greater consequences for missing negatives, like a threat, than there is for missing positives, like food, right? If you miss an apple that's hanging in the tree, chances are you will stumble across many more apples or other fruits, things like this, before you starve to death, right? But if you're surfing and you miss one shark fin in the water, it might be the last time you ever surf, right? And that's why it's really important, why our mind is really sculpted to make sure that we don't miss the negatives, because it's really evolutionary and survival, in a survival context, it's more important than the positives, right? So natural selection actually hardwired our brain to do three interesting and simultaneous things. First, it made it pleasurable to do things that increase the likelihood of us passing on our genes. Two, it ensured that this pleasure does not last long, right? Could you imagine, you eat something, you're just so satisfied, you never have to eat something again. or one orgasm was enough and you're just done for the rest of your life, right? And number three, it focuses us more on the pleasure that a relevant behavior will bring and less about how fleeting that pleasure is, right? So before we get the chocolate cake, right, it has to tell us, oh, it's going to taste so good, it's going to feel so good, you're really going to want it. It doesn't remind us that, oh, that fades in like 5 minutes, 10 minutes after you've wolfed it down, right? And then you're going to be uncomfortable with all that sugar you've dumped into your system, and your stomach's going to be super full, and you're going to be uncomfortable for like an hour or two afterwards, right? It doesn't bring these things up, right? So I think there's a really good quote from Robert Wright, right? And it goes like this. The human brain was designed by natural selection to mislead us, even enslave us. If you ask yourselves what kinds of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions guide us through life each day, the answer is not the kinds of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that give us an accurate picture of reality or make us happy and content. No, at the most basic level, the answer is the kinds of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that helped our ancestors get their genes into the next generation. We are designed to crave food, to outdo rivals, to have sex, to earn the esteem of others, because these things helped our ancestors pass on their genes, right? And if you're interested, he wrote a really interesting book about why Buddhism is true, with this and a lot of other arguments, both from his personal experience and from the empirical literature, right? So what are some implications here, right? First, natural selection is not overly concerned with happiness, right? It even keeps us unhappy to motivate certain behaviors, right? To drive us in certain directions. It also implies that humans are susceptible to depression, anxiety, paranoia, unhappiness, addiction, and what we're dealing with here, clinical burnout, right? But remember, you are not your fault, right? What really reassures me when these things kind of come up, and when I talk about them with my patients, is I remind them that you are not your fault, right? You are here and susceptible to all these things I listed due to causes and conditions fully outside of your control, right? I didn't choose a brain to have a negativity bias. I didn't handpick my instincts and select them in certain ways, right? This is kind of what is our cost of admission, right? It's our price for incarnating, in so to speak, right? And so you can let go of some of that kind of ownership of it, right? And do know that the negativity bias has millennia of evolutionary head start on you, right? So it's, there's parts of our brain that we call the reptilian and mammalian part of the brains that you share with a lot of other early ancestors and things like that, right? So it has a lot of head start on you. So that you find it difficult at times, that you get caught by depression or burnout, it's kind of par for the course, right? So you might be asking yourself, how bad is it, right? How much burden am I taking on by caring for others? How bad is my burnout, right? And it's really challenging to kind of evaluate your own burnout, right? We don't have access to other people's minds. We don't get out of our skin and kind of evaluate it objectively. We have our subjective measure, and we find that burnout, kind of like stress, is something that humans are not really good at checking in with accurately. So they've done studies where they've hooked people up to different machines that measure stress responses objectively. So there's like galvanic skin response, there's pupil dilation, heart rate, blood pressure, diaphragmatic pressure, a whole bunch of different things they can do to kind of get at how stresses the body objectively. And they hook people up to these things. They ask, how stressed are you? And people say, oh, I'm not stressed at all. And all the research is coming in that actually your body is sending signals that it is, that it's in pain or that it's stressed out, cortisol, all the things are happening, right? So we're not really good at kind of measuring our checking in our accurate stress level. And same thing with burnout, right? So what we've tried to do is there's a couple measures, we call them self-report assessment measures, things you can fill out on Likert scales, 0 to 5, that are have psychometric properties that have been evaluated and published and compared with other measures. And I present some of the ones that are kind of more common, right? Probably the one that's referenced most often is called the Maslach Burnout Inventory, or the MBI. And this one is made for providers, educators, healthcare professionals, right? So there's other questions on there that are specific. It was developed by Christina Maslach, She's made a career out of measuring occupational burnout, but it's a copywritten material, copywritten measure, right? So I can't just hand it out, right? You can buy them. I think Mind Garden is the website you can go to and buy copies of them. I think you can to reproduce in the rights of like 25 or 50 at a go. I have some that are left over from the last time that I did this presentation. So if you email me and you promise that you only use it once to kind of check in, I can email it out to you. You can get it in. I think I have like 30 or so left. So the first 30 people who email me out, I'll hand it out, right? But I can't give it to you now. The another one that I thought would be a good alternative is a non-copywritten one called the Zarit the Zarit Burden Interview or Inventory. So it's a self-report, or it can be done as an interview. And this one was originally designed by Stephen Zarit, and he did it for those who are caring for those with dementia. Usually it's the loved one of someone who is suffering dementia. And it's a way to measure how much burden are you taking on by caring for your loved one. But I think a lot of the questions are actually very relevant to the caring fields that we're in. So it might be good to complete this and then check in with some norms. So I did give it to the team before this presentation. It might be available to you on the website, and it's non-copyrighted, so you can fill it out now. And I present the norms here for both the Maslach Burnout Inventory and the Zarit, so you can kind of compare your scores. There's also a number of peer-reviewed publications that gives norms for different populations. They've done some for nurses, done some for medical providers, so you can see what's kind of different if you want to dig a little bit. But these are the norms that are given in the publicated versions of these inventories, right? So check in, complete them yourself, see how you're doing. It might be a good indication of how bad your burnout is. And just as a side note, what's up with psychologists who name things after themselves, right? Maslach and Zarit are both psychologists, and they put their last name on it, on their inventories, which is a bit egoic and self-centered if you ask me. Anyways, this next section is called the Dr. Paul Hutman method for correcting the negativity bias. So, for correcting the negativity bias, I cannot emphasize this enough, but practices are necessary, right? Awareness of the bias is not enough. And how do you know? Because I just told you about it, and you still have a negativity bias, and so do I, right? If awareness were enough, it wouldn't be here anymore, right? But knowing it's there is not enough to kind of change this momentum, this millennium head start that the negativity bias has for you. So practices are necessary. And I find that actually practices that get you into routines are better than kind of yo-yo kind of things where you do a lot right away and then not so much later on, right? So do remember that the negativity bias operates on many levels of the brain, levels that are beyond logic, reason, and conscious understanding, levels that are designed to override reason and logic, right? So sometimes the negativity bias is brought up in the terms of addiction. And the term that I really like to use from the addiction literature is hijack, right? Sometimes unhealthy habits, addictions, or behaviors that we don't want or get us into poor self-care, literally they hijack our behavior and take us into this other direction. But again, like it's programmed over millennia. So remember all these things. But I would encourage you to not only know that you can do things that not only correct the negativity bias, but start to implant a positivity bias, right? They've done studies. These things are possible. You can do it. That's why I do these presentations. I'm very hopeful that there's things out there. And I would encourage you to work with your mind, right? And there's some kind of motivation I can give you and why I think working with your mind is particularly important, right? So where would there be leather enough to cover the entire world? With just the leather of my sandals, as if the whole world is covered. Likewise, I am unable to restrain all external phenomenon, but shall I restrain my own mind? What need is there to restrain anything else? And these are words written by Shantideva, who was a Buddhist monk in India in the 8th century, when he was kind of developing his own way of kind of being compassionate and caring for others, right? He wrote The Way of the Bodhisattva, and it's really interesting about how much he uses working with the mind as a tool to kind of self-correct things. in ourselves, and also to kind of engender a sense of compassion for working with others, right? And this is one of his famous lines, and it, to me, just kind of gets at the heart of it, right? If we are doing things to work with our mind, and our mind being the filter through which a lot, if not most, of our sensations, perceptions, and things get into our bodies and central nervous systems. If the lens on that, the focus on your mind is healthy and accurate, then we can endure a lot of challenging external circumstances like COVID and distance learning and things like that quite well, right? And if the mind is there, if the mind is kind of, if you worked on the level of the mind a lot, you'll be ready for anything that life circumstances throw at you. But probably being medical professionals, you might like something a little more medical, right? And Bruce Lipton wrote an interesting book and an argument in the biology of belief. Now, he was one of the original stem cell researchers, and he reminds us of some points that you're probably quite aware of, right? First, that the vast majority of humans have all the necessary genes that they need to live successfully, right? That genes don't control our biology, right? They're more passive blueprints, right? And genes are actually controlled by or activated by outside signals. And he reminds us that one of the biggest ways that our genes get activated, one of these biggest outside signals, is our perceptions. What we believe, what we think, our assumptions about the world, that's how our biology gets information from the external world, right? If you think about it, I think there's only one part of the olfactory bulb way back in your nostrils that's part of the brain that's exposed to the external world. The rest, right, to get in has to be transduced, from our retinas or our cochlear organ, right, to transduce different types of sensory perception into electronic signals to get into the brain, right? It's not a direct access, right? We don't actually see these things in the outside. This is all just an interpretation that our mind kind of creates for us, right? And so all of this gets filtered through here, and if it's off, right, if it's shifted in a negative way, you get a lot of negative things. He goes on to argue that there's 3 ways in which our cells get injured, our cells get harmed, right? Through injuries like external traumas, right, blunt force trauma, things like that. Through the induction of toxins, right, if we take in a toxic substance, and also inaccurate beliefs and perceptions, right? It's like mentally engendered stress. I have veterans who know that they're back from Vietnam, that there's not someone hiding in the bushes ready to jump out, that their minds perceive that there's something there, and they live in a state of perpetual stress as if that's true, right? If I believe that there is a bear in the bushes outside, right? Even if it's not there, even if there's no actual stimuli, my body will start to release cortisol, the fight or flight reflex will start kicking in, right? My body will start to respond as if it's true, right? So again, it's another motivation to kind of work with the mind, that if we get that in the right mindset, then things can be a hell of a lot easier, right? So correcting the negativity bias. There's a lot of different ways to do this, right? Thousands, I would guess, right? Well, I'll give a lot of them today, but I think one of those that is the best is by taking positive states and using attention and concentration and translating it into lasting traits, right? Positive traits. So we take, I'm going to show you how to take ephemeral cognitive and emotional states and translate them into lasting neural structures in the brain, right? And if we do this enough, we can start, thickening certain areas of the brain in a positive way. So remember that since positives don't stick in the brain as easily as negatives, we have to do something special, right? So Rick Hansen is famous about saying that in the brain, it's like Teflon for the positives, right? It just slides right off, and Velcro for the negatives, right? That's just the way we're wired, right? So since the positives don't stick, we have to give our brains a little opportunity to make those lasting neural structures. And we do this by doing what I call steeping, right? I think of tea, in hot water, right? We have to steep and stay with positive experiences a little bit longer. And we can do some other tricks here to make that steeping a little more of an effective process, right? So we use the power of attention and time to give our brains time to kind of catch up and create lasting neural traits, right? So the research says that about 10 seconds is good, but 30 seconds is actually a lot better to steep in a positive experience in order to make it something that lasts, okay? If you want to know more about this and other processes, Hardwiring Happiness by Rick Hanson is an excellent book. It goes into the detailed kind of neurophysiology of different things. Rick Hanson also has another book that he actually, I think it's only available in audiobook, but he actually narrates it. It's called The Enlightened Brain. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. It's in the resources in the back, so you can look it up. But what I like about the second one is that he actually guides you through certain practices that he's developed through his neuropsychological research in order to develop something that's more effective for bringing about things that bring us to peace, joy, calm, contentment, and caring, right? So he can actually guide you through some meditations and things like that. The one that I picked for today is really simple but profound, and it's called Heal. And actually we'll be doing just the first couple ones of this. So there's a proverb in psychology that where attention goes, energy flows. And we mean this in a lot of different ways. The more that we do research into attention and concentration, the more we find that it has greater impact than we thought, right? So attending to different aspects of our environment can mean drastic changes in a lot of different things. They've done studies and they found that people can actually heal parts of their body that are injured if they focus on it more and more. You can recover more quickly from sicknesses, infections and things like that by attending to different body parts and doing body meditations. You can also speed up or slow down autonomic nervous system, different aspects to change things. I've actually seen videos of Buddhist monks in the Himalayas who are working on something along these lines, where they found a way to do a certain type of concentrated meditation where they can increase their body temperature just by concentration alone. And what they'll do is once they've mastered this technique, they'll challenge themselves by going to a frozen lake. They hit their staffs in the lake to kind of break up the ice on top. They'll dip their robes in it. They'll wrap themselves up, right? They'll do this meditation and you'll just see this huge billows of steam kind of rising off. They'll do it until their robes are dry, and then they'll go and dip it again and do it until the sun comes up. I would freeze in like 30 seconds, right? But they've learned this thing to kind of keep them alive all night, and they do it to kind of test themselves, right? We can also dull the sensation of pain by focusing on different things. I experience chronic pain, and prolonged sitting is one of the least comfortable positions for me. And I've learned that by doing certain meditations or concentrating on where it hurts, I can go in and kind of soften the tension around it, hold those kind of the parts of my body that are in pain with a little bit of compassion, and a dull sensation. And sometimes concentrating on the parts of my body that feel good, usually it's my hands or my head that feel really good, takes away from, kind of distracts myself from the places that are in pain, all things that kind of can help, right? Among others, right? There's a lot of other things, but the important thing here is that intensity and concentration when going into these things has profound effects, right? So HEAL is an acronym that stands for have a positive experience, enhance the experience, absorb it in, and the L is actually an optional therapeutic practice that's a little more advanced, right? And I'm going to keep it blank. We're not going to practice that one today. I want to give you something that you can start with right away. And I also want to kind of leave you a little bit baited, that if you're really interested in knowing what the full HEAL practice is, that you'll look up Rick Hanson, buy the book, try it out yourself, right? And hopefully this will be something that kind of hooks you so you'll be off on a good self-care adventure. But we're going to do the first three, which is enough to get things going. The H, the E, and the A are what I consider the steeping in the positive experience, right? So I'm going to walk you through it kind of intellectually, but what's far more important is we're going to try it today in session, right? We're going to do an experiential practice, which is worth more than 1,000 words in a way. So step one is to have a positive experience, right? This can be spontaneous or intentional, right? A lot of times I find myself practicing this just spontaneously when I found that I'm feeling good or joyous or just something, I just stumble upon something naturally healing or engaging. But we can also set and have a positive experience intentionally, which is what we're going to be doing today, right? Actually today we're going to be using positive memories to engender a certain emotional feel. and stick with that, right? But for the sake of this practice, it doesn't matter if it's spontaneous or intentional. And there's a lot of different things that you can focus on that have a positive experience. It could be an internal sensation, like a sense of vitality or a sense of aliveness in your hands. If you've ever, sat down and concentrated on your hands, you'll notice that they start to tingle and feel alive after a while. It's really interesting. There's really a wealth of experience that goes on that we don't even recognize because we're not attending to it. But when you start to give it a little time and a little attention, worlds kind of pop out at you. Another great thing, one of my favorites, is to focus on positive emotion, joy, happiness, contentment. You can have a positive experience through a fact, an insight, or a quality, right? Like, for instance, the fact that you're taking time right now to take care of yourself by paying attention to this lecture, by seeing if there's something that pops out to you that resonates with you. Or it can just be a general mood, something that's a little more diffuse than an emotion, just a contentment, just a general sense of satisfaction, right? I was just to think about it. I had this kind of feeling when I was sitting on the dock with my grandpa overlooking Lake Erie on his cabin, right? We weren't saying anything. There was a nice little breeze coming off the lake. It was just this nice kind of contentment feeling. And that can be wonderful to kind of to live with for a while. And it's okay if it's subtle. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It doesn't have to be the best positive experience you've ever had. It's okay if it's subtle, right? Step 2 is to enhance this experience, right? And we'll do this through kind of attention and will, kind of attention and intention, right? You hold your focus on it, right? So sometimes, not sometimes, but all the time, the mind wanders a lot, right? And so we'll use, different techniques to kind of bring it back and focus on it. And you kind of open yourself to it, just stay with it, and you find that it kind of grows of its own accord. And if you just let thoughts come and go and just kind of stick with it, you enhance it, right? And step 3, my favorite step, is to absorb it into you, right? So you intend that this experience kind of sinks into you, that it washes over you, right? You can imagine that the walls between you and the experience are kind of dissolving away, or that you're being dipped into it. When I think about this, I think of the old Greek myth of Achilles being dipped into some river by a god to make him immortal, right? Just being completely fully immersed in it. Sometimes what can be really helpful at this stage is to use your visual spatial abilities. So you can imagine that your body or your being is being filled with water or light, or whatever experience you're having is kind of filling you up like water or light. And at this stage, in the steep, sometimes a gesture, a little half smile, maybe a hand over a heart, or a slight body movement, would be good. I find that when I really sink into it, I find my head goes back a little bit, the corners of my mouth go up a bit, and just indulge yourself, allow yourself to do this. One thing that's nice about doing this remotely is that no one else has to see you, right? You can click your camera off when we do this experiential exercise, and just allow yourself to sink into it, right? If you're taking care of yourself, who cares, right? So when we go into this, for those who don't routinely meditate or have like a deep breathing practice or something like that, I kind of want to set it up a little bit. So first, probably the most important thing is that your mind will wander, right? I'm going to be guiding you through this experiential exercise, and my mind will wander within the first 10 seconds of starting it, right? That's not a problem. That's just what the mind does, right? There's a famous saying by A.H. Dogen that the only monk without thoughts is a dead monk, right? So even monks who are meditating multiple hours a day, every day of their lives, right? Their minds still wander, because the goal of this practice is not to stop thinking or to stop having thoughts come up. The goal is to stay with an experience, and your thoughts are part of it, right? When it does go, not if, but when your mind wanders, just gently bring it back. And it's important that you don't get down on yourself. There's nothing wrong that if the mind wanders, right? It's not like you're doing it worse, or that if your mind is less wandering, that you're doing it better, right? That's not the case at all. So I find that with Westerners in particular, and people who are new to meditation, they think, if my mind isn't clear like the blue sky, I'm doing something wrong, and that's simply not the case, right? So there's no expectation of perfection. It's more about that felt sense of something positive or joyous than anything verbal or linguistic going on in your head. like your thoughts, right? It's really a non-verbal kind of experience you want to tap into. And we're going to see if we can try to touch it directly, Don't go through your mind that evaluates what this experience is or describes what it is. Try to just touch it directly, right? That's why the gesture or the visualization of it kind of washing over you with light tends to be really helpful, right? So if it helps, right, we're gonna try it. So the first step is you have to select a positive experience or fact, right? We're gonna be using memory today, right? So what I want you to do is think about something, a memory that is either relatively recent or that you know in detail that brings a smile to your face, right? Maybe this is your wedding day, maybe it's a gathering or an accomplishment, a party, a vacation. When I went skydiving is when I tend to use that excitement that you get before you jump out of a plane. A romantic moment that you had with someone. For me right now, it's the opportunity to speak about things that I love. I love doing this, and it's just wonderful to do it. That's what I end up when I'm doing it in a style like this. This is what I end up kind of focusing on because it's already here, right? Whatever it is, just make sure you have a decent memory about it because we're going to be using details of that memory to let it sink in and wash over us. Okay. So does everyone have a good memory in mind? I'll give you a couple moments. Pick one out, okay? So this practice is kind of like enjoying a fire, right? Having a positive experience is like the match being lit. Enhancing it with our intention and attention is like adding fuel to that fire. And then when you can sit back and just enjoy its warmth in the winter, that's when we're really absorbing it, right? So that's what we're going to be doing right now. So I like to close my eyes for this because I find I can sink into the experience a little bit better. But if you feel more comfortable with your eyes open, fine. Generally, if your eyes are open, it's probably best if you kind of look at a neutral point, some place where you're not distracted by what you're seeing and you can kind of stick with your internal experience, right? And when you're doing this, it's important that you don't go immediately from whatever you're doing and just hard stop, like you hit a brick wall into this kind of meditation. It's always good to kind of ease in and take some time, just like we did at the beginning, to just settle in. Maybe take a couple deep breaths and let go of some tension. Find a sitting position or a lying position if you like, where the spine is straight but not strained. And in your own time, gently start to bring that memory to mind. And what really helps is to start with the little details and then build out to a full picture. Right? So where were you? Who was with you, or were you alone? What were some of the colors or sights or smells occurring in this memory? What were you wearing? What was the day like? And as you start to build a mental picture, start tapping in to what emotional tone is arising. What positive internal experience co-occurs with this memory? Come back to the memory if you need to, but give more attention to this actual felt sense of joy or happiness, contentment, whatever positive it is. Try to go in and sense it directly, not filtered through the mind. Imagine that the walls between you and this experience are dissolving, and it's washing over you like water or light entering your body. Maybe allow it to bring a gentle smile to your face. just steep in it. Take some time because there's absolutely no rush. But when you're ready, gently come back to the room and open your eyes. Now that whole experience there took about 1.5 minutes, actually 3 times longer than you need to take a positive experience and translate it into a neural structure, right? I'm sure you have 30 seconds multiple times throughout your day to just stop and allow it to wash over you, just to take it in a bit, right? And do what we did here. Go after the experience directly, allow it to kind of dissolve the walls between you and the experience and wash over you, right? I assure you that for the vast majority of your notes, when you're documenting, it can wait 30 minutes or 30 seconds, excuse me. You can enjoy a couple sips of your coffee, you can enjoy your tea, take a little break, take these 30 second steeps throughout the day. And I think you might notice it can have drastic effects on your mood and burnout throughout the day. Okay. So that's one of my favorites, but there's a lot of others, right? So there's a number of other skillful means for self-care that I kind of want to review, right? I think regardless of what you choose, right, whatever self-care activity or inactivity, and again, sometimes not doing something is just as important as doing something, whatever you choose, I want to strongly encourage you to do a number of things. First, and perhaps most importantly, be present, right? Self-care can only happen in the present moment. Your life can only happen in the present moment. And if you're not here to be with it, it's not going to have lasting, lasting impact for you. It's not going to be as fulfilling. It could be kind of an empty thing if you're just doing it to get somewhere else, right? And so there's a lot of teachings from a lot of different wisdom traditions, both religious and secular, that remind us to just be present, right? One of my favorites comes from Alan Watts, and he said, "For if we open ourselves and see clearly, it becomes obvious that there is no other time than this instant, and that the past and future are abstractions without any concrete reality." Said more simply, Ram Dass reminded us, remember, be here now, right? Which was the title of one of his famous books, right? If you like a more religious viewpoint from a Christian tradition, Meister Eckhart has some wonderful quotes. My favorite being, "Past and future avail God from our sight, burn up both with fire." From a Buddhist view, probably my favorite out of all of these is a Zen proverb that says, "This is it. There is no next." Or Shinryoku Suzuki said, "To live is enough," right? That's enough. And I like Eckhart Tolle can cut through a lot of this stuff. I consider Eckhart Tolle kind of the patron saint of the present moment. And he said, you need to realize deeply that the present moment is all you have, all you will ever have, right? So if you're not here, you're not living your life. So find things that keep you here, that keep you present, right? If you're finding that what you're doing for self-care is taking you out of the present moment, it's not going to have as much transformative power, right? I actually learned the KISS method from my veterans, and I think it's brilliant, right? If any of you are veterans or served in the military currently or whatever, you might know what the KISS method stands for. And it stands for keep it simple, stupid, right? But for the sake of this, I'll just say keep it simple, sweetheart, since we're kind of coming from a compassionate and gentle place, right? Keep it simple. I don't care how many acronyms you have after your name, how many authored and peer-reviewed publications, or how many awards you win. It doesn't change the basics. So you need to stop sometimes and check in, because we forget or get distracted. How's my breath? Have I drank enough water? How's the food? Do I have shelter? The basics, right? The absolute basics. Keep it simple. I find when people come to my office and their self-care isn't doing so great, I ask them, when's the last time you ate? When's the last time you had a hot bath, or you're taking care of yourself? And you find that a lot of these things are lacking, right? I often tell my veterans that there's 4 pillars of good mental health. Diet, fitness, and sleep quality are three, right? And you notice that none of those things have anything maybe directly to do about mental activity or mental health, right? But I think if these three things are good, right? If they are a solid foundation, a lot of issues that people are dealing with stress or burnout or mental health kind of dissolve into them in and of themselves, right? If you're taking care of yourself with diet, fitness, and sleep quality, you're much more resilient. I think the fourth pillar is meditation, and we'll talk about more about that as to why later, right? So are you giving your central nervous system, your body time to rest and digest, right? So one thing I hand out, and I do like to hand this out to even, consummate professionals who've been in the field for multiple years and have 2 doctorates and whatnot. I like to tell them that this piece of paper is not above you, right? It's called Everything is Awful and I'm Not Okay. It's free resource online. And I hand it out to people who are struggling with self-care because it has these quick questions to check in about basic self-care stuff that we often miss. It's ironic, but sometimes when we need self-care the most, or when we need a drink of water the most, it's the time when we forget about it, or we get distracted and we don't pick up on it, right? So it has a whole bunch of simple questions like, are you hydrated? Have you showered in the last day? Have you taken your medication? Did you miss a dose, right? All these kind of things just to check in. And I think it's a good place to start if you don't know anywhere else. Another important tip is to do self-care, whatever action or inactivity, for itself and not for its outcome, right? There's a quote, do your duty to the best of your ability, abandoning worry and selfish attachment to the result, and remaining calm in both success and failure. And this is part of the Bhagavad Gita, an ancient wisdom book. I think it's like 5,000 or 6,000 years old, right? On a chapter called Karma Yoga, right? So action for self-care, right? If we are doing things as just a means to an end, it really robs it of its integrity, of its ability, like I said, to transform and be good self-care. It's really important you stay present and do whatever is important for you for its own sake, right? How many people here have been on the treadmill or been running or lifting weights and they don't like it? They're just counting down the clock until they can be done and get home and get on to their real life, right? And it starts to become a tedious task. It starts to become monotonous, right? I often find that a lot of times what we do for self-care, if it's a trick, if it's repetitious and it's not examined, it often becomes a trap because we resent doing it, right? We just see it as a means to an end. So it's really important, although difficult, to do self-care, whatever activity, for its own sake, okay? I would also strongly encourage you to do life-affirming activities, and whatever that means to you, right? For me, that's things that make me say, I am alive, right? Things that really connect you with what's most important, with getting something out of this life that's really meaningful, right? If you're really at a loss, like people come to me and say, I really don't know what's a life-affirming activity for me, I say, go skydiving. Jump out of a plane and you'll immediately know what is life-affirming and what's not, right? For me, if I was there in Hawaii right now, I probably would be planning my next time to go surfing. For me, being part of the elements, that's a perfect life-affirming activity. It forces me to stay present, doing it for its own sake, right? I guess channel surfing at home is the best that I can get from it right now, right? Another thing that can be really helpful is to set a certain intention before you start, right? So if you're, say, meditating, if you're going for a walk, if you're going to talk to a friend, if you set the intention that I'm doing this to take care of myself, I'm doing this to engender more joy or love in my life, it uses top-down processing, right? It uses the highest, most evolutionary advanced structures of the brain to influence more autonomic processes below our subconscious level, right? So when we set an intention, I imagine that it kind of trickles down into our limbic systems and starts to kind of muster forces in the direction we want it to go. So setting intention kind of lets it know what direction you want it to go in, right? I'm listening to this presentation so that I can be a better provider for my veterans, for my patients. It might be a wonderful intention, right? So another thing that I like to present as good means for self-care is what I call perspective shifts or kind of reframes on life. And I find that perspective shifts are kind of philosophical and abstract. So it's hard to kind of hit the nail right in the head and kind of describe it. I'll list you some things that have really been great perspective shifts for me and hope that you get the kind of underlying theme. You kind of know it when it happens, right? Or as A.H. Dogan used to say, the truth must disturb, right? When it's really truthful, when it really kind of shifts you out of a funk or a bad pattern, it's kind of got to shake you up a bit. So perspective shifts are kind of one way to get at this, right? So Wes Nisker is someone for me who gives me great perspective shifts, and he does it through humor, right? So he talks about the subatomic shuffle, right? So he likes to remind people when he gives talks or lectures that every single subatomic particle in your body was something that you inherited, right? Maybe originally first from your mother, and then I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that the longest living cell in our body lasts for 7 years. So at least every 7 years, we're getting a complete overhaul of every cell in our body, maybe every subatomic particle, right? I know that the liver regenerates at an incredible rate, right? The cells kind of over time. So it's kind of like that old adage, like if you replace one plank on a ship, it's still the same ship, right? You replace 2 planks, it's still the same ship, but you can replace every single plank, but something about you still knows it's the same ship, right? So it likes to remind us that, yeah, all these subatomic particles came in and they're all going to leave when you're dead, right? That we're just shuffling them through. He also says that there's no fixed point in the universe. And he likes to remind us that the Earth is rotating at about 1,000 miles per hour. It's revolving around the sun at 66,000 miles per hour. And it's whipping through the Milky Way at about 500,000 miles per hour as we speak, right? But we're all here together. 3 cheers for gravity, right? And when's the last time that you've been grateful for gravity, right? We take it for granted, right? But perspective shifts get us back to that simply that, yeah, I'm really grateful that we have gravity right now. Otherwise, we wouldn't be on the Earth, right? So sometimes these little things help. Other perspective shifts comes through philosophy. And someone who's been integral of doing this for me is Alan Watts, who I quoted earlier, right? So he likes to remind us that the universe is not out there, right? The universe is just as much behind my eyes as it is on the outside of my eyes, right? It's internal and external. So he says that you are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself. How cool is that, right? He also reminds us that the meaning of life is just to be alive. It doesn't have to be more than that. It's so plain and so obvious and so simple, yet everyone rushes around in a great panic as though it were necessary to achieve something beyond ourselves, right? It doesn't have to be more complex than that, right? Other perspective shifts comes through Pema Chodron and compassion. And she wrote a couple books about this. She's like the patron saint of compassion for me. And she said, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. And only when we know our own darkness can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when you recognize our shared humanity, right? And quotes and readings like this really helped me kind of adjust when I was first getting going in psychotherapy, because I think maybe there's something that's self-serving or egoic about it, but maybe something from academic traditions, grad school and med school, that kind of teach us that we are the healer and we kind of do something to other people to heal them. But I really think, especially in psychotherapy and in other forms of healing, that this is not the case, that it's our shared humanity and that connecting that really does it, right? Bedside manner is important, right? Not just for not getting sued, but for healing in a lot of ways, right? And I think along these lines, a really important perspective shift that's happened maybe in a couple of years or so that's really kind of synced in for me is that caregiving, your spouse, the kids, vacation, money. So going back a little bit, I realized that caregiving, my spouse, kids, vacation, money may not be here to make me happy, right? I think this is especially important in my marriage, right? We have that old kind of fairy tale that you're going to marry someone that's going to make you happy for the rest of your life, right? I don't want that kind of pressure. I don't want to be responsible for my wife's happiness. That's her problem, right? And I don't want to put, the weight of my happiness on her shoulders, right? But I do find that my practice, vacations, my marriage, right, isn't necessarily here to make me happy, but maybe it's here to help me grow, to be more conscious, to help me develop, right? And if I look through it through that lens, then it makes sense of the challenging times as well as the good times, right? Happiness is a high energy, rare kind of state. Right now, honestly, I would think I would take peace of mind. I would take peace, which is much more sustainable. And you can feel a sense of peace when you're happy or sad, right? Negative or positive. I would take that over happiness. So maybe what we're aiming for by calling it happiness isn't the right thing, right? But maybe your practice is here to help you grow and develop. And even when it's challenging, maybe it's doing exactly what it needs to be doing. So a good question now might be, when you're doing self-care, when have you arrived, right? When have you arrived at good self-care, right? Eckhart Tolle said it really well. He said to ask yourself this and other questions like it: when have I arrived? Often. And ask yourself, am I there? Have I arrived? Am I present? Things like this. And the best way to know when you've arrived is when you no longer have to answer your question. And I know that's nebulous and kind of, not in a nice box that our mind would love, right? But I do think that's one of the best ways to get at self-care, which is this kind of more nebulous state, right? So ask yourself, am I doing what's right for me? And when you don't have to ask yourself anymore, you're there, right? There also are a little more objective ways to kind of get at it, right? I call these kind of, when your life is flowing with ease, right? That's when you're there. And there's a couple states: curiosity, playfulness, joy, and humor. These 4 states are really indicative of when you're there, when you're in good self-care. Because a lot of neuroimaging studies, again, Rick Hansen did some of these, show us that curiosity, playfulness, joy, and humor only come about in rare circumstances when a lot of the central nervous system, a lot of our brains are in a good spot, right? When we're rest and digest, when we're feeling calm, contentment, and caring, this is when curiosity, joy, playfulness, and humor tend to arise, right? So they're actually relatively rare. And if you're getting these a lot, if these are permeating your day, if they're coming up very often, then you must be doing something right, okay? So these might be good indicators. There's also some additional resources that I really would love to plug you into, right? The first one, the one I'm going to spend the most time on, is Headspace, right? You probably already heard of it. Headspace is one of the most popular guided meditation and mindfulness apps on the market, right? I have the website, and you can go to use a QR code to get to it if you want to check it out, right? One thing that's really awesome, since COVID started, the people at Headspace, seems like a decently enlightened company, allowed free access for those who are in healthcare professions, right? So I've actually got a free access to the full app. I don't have to buy anything, just because I have a national provider indicator number, an NPI number, right? So if you have an NPI number, if you're a nurse, or if you work for the the NHS, if you're an NHS worker, you can get this for free, right? And if you go to the website listed there, or the second QR code, it'll take you to a link to the website, letting you know how to get connected, right? It's an excellent resource. So I use it when my mind's kind of distracted, because sometimes when it's distracted, it's really nice to have a guided meditation, a mindfulness exercise to go through this, because the mind tends to wander a lot. So the constant cues to come back and refocus your attention would be helpful than unguided ones where I'm just letting my mind kind of go. It's professionally recorded. I think the person who does the professional recordings is named Andy, and I think he's a psychologist turned Buddhist monk. So he's really living what he's doing. He's talking from a place of authority. And there's tons of different accesses of things you can do on there. Sitting on a cushion meditations, mindfulness while you're on a plane to help you go to sleep, a whole bunch of different things. If you do nothing else besides check out this and get connected with this resource, I would consider this presentation a success, right? If you remember, the things I'm encouraging you to do are to be present, to do things for their own sake, and do things that are life-affirming. And I think mindfulness and meditation combines all 3 of those. That's why I consider meditation one of those 4 pillars of really good self-care, okay? So do check it out. There's some other apps for smartphones. I use Insight Timer every day. It has free guided and unguided meditations and some background music and sounds, if that helps. What's nice about a timer for meditation, if you're new to it, is that if you set like an alarm to go off on your phone, or a timer on your phone, it keeps on ringing annoyingly until you hit stop, right? what these kind of timers do is you set a timer, and then the time elapses and it dings gently, and it allows you to not have to touch a button or break from a good meditation. And you can just kind of sit with it until you're ready to come out, right? You don't have to hit a button. Insight Timer is fantastic. I've used a little bit, just experimented a little bit, but I've heard great things about Sam Harris's Waking Up app, right? Sam Harris is an author. He's written about a couple things about enlightenment from or spiritual awakenings or spirituality from a non-religious point of view. And some of his other books, he also developed an app. And where I've heard about this a lot is from my veterans. So he's really cool, or at least people who administrate the app, because I've had veterans reach out via his email and say, hey, I'm kind of poor, I can't afford to buy it, and he just gives it to them for free. So if you have people who are struggling monetarily, but they have a smartphone, they can just dial them up or send them an email and get it for free. And I've heard some good things about the meditations in there. Calm is another great one. I put the resources here. Calm is a paid one. You can get like a week trial, but it's really beautiful, really elegant. I tried it for a while, but since Headspace became free, I'm kind of defaulting to that. But this is another version that might be really good. There's some interesting books out there, right? The How of Happiness is one in particular. So she sets up a lot of empirical research in a kind of review format, and also an argument that says what we're commonly taught and assume about happiness is wrong, right? We found that about 50% of our happiness is kind of genetically determined. We have just a predetermined genetic level based on genes, of where happiness tends to rest, and we just kind of vary from that spot. 40% is our outlook, our appraisal, our perceptions of what we have, not necessarily what we have, but how we view it, right? So you can have people who would be living below the poverty line and things like that. They can be incredibly happy, right? Because it's 40% of it is perspective, right? And 10% is due to life circumstances like money, success, fame, cars, job, these kind of things. And this is what I think, the culture when I was growing up in a lot of Western cultures tell us the things that actually make us happy, but they really don't, right? And this book outlines kind of why, right? Another good one, this quote comes from this book. So it's ultimately happiness comes down to choosing between the discomfort of becoming aware of your mental afflictions and the discomfort of being ruled by them. And this book outlines a number of ways of being aware of and no longer ruled by some of our mental afflictions. So Yogang Minya Rinpoche is a Buddhist monk, but he had panic attacks and suffered from chronic anxiety a lot as a teenager, and really struggled with mindfulness and a whole bunch of other things. And he found ways of kind of using Buddhist practices, some of the things that I talk about in here, in order to kind of really help him get over that. It's also a great book. There's a lot of good resources for those who are beginners for meditations, or those who have found that the meditation practice is kind of staled a bit. There's really good kind of reviews in there. So I do recommend checking it out. Tara Brach is a psychologist who wrote a wonderful book called Radical Acceptance, which can be used for yourself or for clients, patients, those kind of things. It's a wonderfully written book. She teaches from a very compassionate place, right? She also has Sounds True, which is a digital library of audiobooks. She does some podcasts and interviews. A lot of interesting things there about self-care, about spirituality, about meditation, Buddhism, a whole bunch of different interesting things. So I do recommend checking out Sounds True. A lot of them are free, and it can be great ways to find other avenues for you to take care of yourself. So in summary, we inherited a brain that is biased towards the negative. Right? That's good because it helped us stay alive, and we have a species that are here on the planet, but it also means that a lot of those remnants leave us susceptible to unhappiness, to burnout, and a whole lot else, right? But remember, you are not your fault, right? And it has a millennial head start on you. But use skillful means of self-care, things that we know lead to taking better care of yourself, to engaging with your work, staying compassionate when things are tough, when things are COVID related, right? Start simple with the KISS method, water, food, hygiene, shelter, take care of yourself. You can do some of those 30-second steeps like we practiced.
If you want to go on to learn the heal technique, learn what that L means, you can. It's great for healing old wounds. Other things you can do that I strongly emphasize is to be here now, be present, right? Whatever you choose, do something that's life affirming and do it for its own sake and not for its outcome. And if you get stuck, kind of be open to perspective shifts, things that kind of disturb you a little bit, and shake up how you're viewing things or how you're interacting with the world, your relationships to your thoughts, emotions, and feelings, to get you better into a better place, right? And whenever you arrive, whenever you are there, when your life flows with ease, when you're noticing a sense of curiosity as opposed to aversion, a sense of playfulness, joy, and humor in your life, then you know you're in a pretty good space, right? So here I put up this slide. The next one has the resources, everything that I referenced, and maybe some more, right? So if you notice that there was a citation at the bottom and you want to look it up, everything here is there. And thank you so much for your attention. And thank you to Kelly for having me for this presentation. It was an absolute blast. And I'd love to take some of your questions.